like to thank the Canton Chamber of Commerce and especially David Kaminsky. David's a class act. If you get a chance, talk to him, and he knows how to network and connect everything. And thank you all for having the vision and energy to come to this event and to talk about the future and some of the changes coming down the road. Now, no need to take any notes. My slides and my discussion is entirely available on our website. So all you have to do is take down the website name. I'm going to take you through a little journey. First, I'm going to start with how dramatic the change caused by the shale gas revolution really is. And it bears repeating, and I'm sure you're going to hear this from other speakers, but it's just so important. Then we're going to take you through what's happening in the chemical industry, how that's translating into manufacturing, and how Ohio Valley is really one of the keys and the core to some of these changes coming. And take a look and focus on 4 disruptive impacts of shale gas. And then the usual conclusions and questions and answers. So let's go back to 1973, and I think most of you remember the first energy shock, and it was a shock. The long gas lines that we've never seen before, how manufacturing changed, how the cars we drove changed, how we heated our houses, how we all got back to set back thermometers and sweaters in the winter instead of turning up the thermostat. Well, that shock was pretty big. Prices increased by over 3 times. And it was followed not too long after by another oil price shock. This one wasn't quite as dramatic, with only a doubling in price. But again, it impacted the U.S. economy, the way we lived, the global economy. We are now in a similar environment. I call it an energy shock. We have seen, due to the shale gas revolution, natural gas prices decline in a 5-year period, the 5 years when really shale gas started to come on stream, by 3.8 times equivalent. So the shock that we're seeing now in reduced prices, the shock to our system in revitalizing manufacturing and business in America is as great as the shocks that we experienced several decades ago. And that's a pretty big driving force for change. Important thing to note is that while we've seen a decline in natural gas prices, if you look all over the world, they've all seen increases. In fact, if you look at our trading partners, our competitors in manufacturing in Europe, in Japan, South Korea, China, they're at prices 3 to 4 times our prices. That's a huge advantage if you have an energy-intensive business. As well as the price of natural gas is now disconnected from the price of crude oil here in the U.S. And that has implications, and it shows that natural gas, if you're going to export it as LNG, is expensive to export. And so therefore we've got this kind of break between oil and natural gas. So now let me take you into the chemical industry and what's happening there. The chemical industry is a little bit different from many of the other industries in that the shale gas is both a fuel and feedstock. Feedstock is the raw material to make the chemicals. And feedstock and fuel can be as much as 80% of the cost of making a chemical. So it has a double impact, if you will, of the chemical industry. It's a very, very big driving force for change. About a year ago, I worked together with PricewaterhouseCoopers on a paper talking about some of the changes. And if you want, that's available on my site as well as the PricewaterhouseCoopers site. And I have some copies outside at my little stand if you want to get them. Don't want you to look at the eye chart here, but we went through some of the economics, and I'll go through them. The interesting thing about this paper, it was covered by about in 80 major news outlets, including things like CNN, Business Week, and so on. Most of the correspondence and questions we got back at either PricewaterhouseCoopers or Top Line Analytics came from companies outside of the U.S., companies from Korea, companies from Japan, starting to understand that the game has changed. Let me take a little deeper look at how the game has changed. I'm going to take you to a chart that's produced by the American Chemistry Council. This was produced back in March of this year. It shows the prices of ethylene. Just look on the left axis, that's ethylene. Ethylene is the number one chemical in volume. It is the building block for many other chemicals, so it's a good gauge of competitiveness in the chemical industry. And if you look back at 2005 and take a look at the prices, you'll see that the Middle East is right around 22 cents per pound of ethylene. And you'll see the other countries in the world, China, Europe, other areas in Asia, which is Northeast Asia, which is really a euphemism for South Korea, as well as Japan. And then finally the U.S., all bunched together at quite a bit higher prices in the Middle East. And this is ethylene business, the chemical business is really a game of inches. A couple pennies per pound, or even fractions of pennies per pound on a product is all the difference between making money and losing money in this business. So let's go forward, and 7 years forward, and see what's happened. 7 years forward to 2012. And here you can see a big, big change. You see U.S. at roughly the same cost as the Middle East. This is pretty shocking. And you see China, Europe, and the rest of Asia, all above 80 cents a pound, or 4 times the cost of the U.S. That's huge. That's a big driving force for change. That's the shock, the energy shock translated through into the chemical industry. I don't want you to read all these quotes. There are many, many more. These are from executives in Saudi Arabia, in Korea, in Japan, and in Europe, linking shale gas to the competitiveness of the chemical industry and questioning what they're going to do about it. They know there's a tsunami of change coming. Well, the chemical industry here in the U.S. has responded. And these numbers, again, by the American Chemistry Council, and they're pretty large. Significant investment, jobs, new taxes, and this is just the beginning. As they start with simple products like ethylene to polyethylene, polyethylene glycol, and all these mumbo-jumbo names that you don't know and hard to pronounce. It's just the beginning. But I also have to say, and you know, I've talked to a number of folks here again about the potential for the shale cracker, and that's a big prize. Sure, 10,000 jobs and $2 billion investment would be a big thing for the Appalachian region. But it's small potatoes are key components that are taken out of the shale gas and used by the chemical industry, and they go into a whole bunch of products and a whole bunch of markets. In fact, they go into 90% of the products that are manufactured and 80% of all markets. So it's pretty big. It goes everywhere. It impacts everything. I talked a little bit earlier about some of the economics that we put together in that white paper with PwC, and let me take those a little bit further. Here are the polyethylene economics of manufacturing polyethylene, the #1 plastic globally, in the U.S. versus China. And I don't want you to look at the numbers. I want you to look at the big bottom line difference. We can make it significantly cheaper here in the U.S. than can be produced in China. Let's take that a little bit further. Let's take a look into how polyethylene processor, a company that makes and takes that polyethylene plastic and makes a part. Maybe it's a part for a car. Maybe it's your ballpoint pen. Maybe it's your badge. Maybe it's this little clicker, whatever it is. And this is an example for one of the companies that I've doing some consulting with that I can't mention their name. They were looking to relocate some of their facilities to China. And I said, hold on, take a look at it. Take a look at what's going to happen. You can make it cheaper here in the U.S. Not by a little, not by 1% or 2%, but by a whole heck of a lot. One of the other things that's changed in manufacturing over the last 30, 40 years is that manufacturing of these parts is on high-speed lines. There's very little labor involved, whether it's in China, whether it's made here in the U.S. So it doesn't really matter for some of these parts if the wages in China are $10 an hour, $1 an hour, or 10 cents an hour. It's immaterial to the bigger scope of the key raw materials going into making these parts.
Plastics.
Sorry for the poor audio on that, but that is a classic movie, The Graduate. Dustin Hoffman's really key role where he got started in Hollywood, and he gets some advice, and the advice is one word, plastics. So bringing this all around to where we are today, the Ohio Valley, and one of the reasons I'm excited to be here is the Ohio Valley is really a core for the plastics processing industry. And on the map you'll see the yellow of Marcellus and Utica overlapping the key states that are involved as well surrounding Ohio. And 50% of plastics processing, in this case our friend polyethylene, is done within a 500-mile radius. 50% of the U.S. This is the core of this industry. And I think the implications are obvious. As shale gas has driven down the cost of natural gas and the ethane, propane, butane, as it translates into the chemical industry, as it translates into manufacturing, as it translates into Ohio as being one of the key central places where this manufacturing is going to occur. And the real beauty of Ohio is that the infrastructure is already here. You've got excellent roads, rail, barge, you name it. The infrastructure is here. When I talk to companies, I do consulting for a number of companies in Texas, while they like the business climate that the state and state officials have, they dislike the state of the infrastructure in Texas, the roads, the barges, the rail connections. They're getting very heavily clogged. It makes business difficult in Texas. So I'm very optimistic about Ohio's future in the coming boom. And the coming boom is going to be a lot bigger than just drilling for shale gas. It's a lot bigger in terms of jobs, in terms of taxes, in terms of opportunity than the chemical industry. Now I'd like to take you into what I call the 4 disruptive impacts. And this is really where companies, if they see the future, are going to really be able to take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of them. These are the game changers. First, onshoring. We talked about China. Let's take a simple product, toothpaste tubes. 95% plus of all toothpaste tubes are made in China. It's almost all plastics. Or substitute that with your ballpoint pen, or 100 other things you can see around your house, or IV bag or syringes in hospitals, and so on and so forth. That stuff's all made in China for the large part. Now, we can make it cheaper in the U.S. Not only make it cheaper, but because it's not made in China, we don't have the problems, the risk that we have in doing business with a Chinese supplier. Chinese supplier, they're how many time zones away? Culturally, they're different from us. Communication's difficult when you have changes in your part or something's not going wrong, as opposed to a supplier around the corner. You have long lead times. There's a reason why it's called the slow boat from China. It takes 2 to 3 weeks to get the product across the Pacific Ocean. And so therefore, the manufacturers that consume these products in cars and whatever have to keep more inventory here to take into account. Inventory is working capital. Inventory and having that is also a problem in terms of flexibility. Suppose Disney comes up with another new movie, and the star of the movie is a purple snake, and Crest makes toothpaste, gets an idea from this, and their marketing guys go, we'll make a toothpaste tube in the shape of that snake from Disney, and pay Disney the bucks for it, and it'll be purple, and the kids will buy toothpaste, and so on and so forth. Well, what do you do with your inventory of all your other toothpaste tubes that switch over? How fast can you make that change? It takes a lot more time, and the time is flexibility when you produce it so far away. And of course, as David pointed out earlier, there's the logistics cost. There's the cost of moving that product from China to U.S. where the demand is. And finally, you need a lot less staff to manage a local versus a supply chain that is so far away and culturally different from our own. As we see, a number of the old rules are being broken. We always thought made in China could be cheaper. Well, made in the U.S. will be cheaper. Let me jump to another area. I call this full substitution. Pressure-treated wood. Some crazy amount is made every year, 7 billion linear board feet. I recently, last weekend in fact, had to restain my pressure-treated deck. It's not a job I like to do. I have to do it every 5 years. I would have rather been able to buy a plastic composite decking material like Trex. Now, Trex was far more expensive than pressure-treated at the time. Think about a future where that product will be cheaper than the pressure-treated wood. And think about how disruptive this is going to be to a company like Weyerhaeuser. Weyerhaeuser is one of the big lumber companies. They take the logs and they convert it into lumber products, including pressure-treated wood. They don't make the plastic composite wood. It's made on a totally different kind of production line, totally different process by totally different companies. Will they even see this change coming? I don't know. And you multiply this not just in pressure-treated wood, but by, if you go to the grocery aisles and take a walk down the grocery aisles and see how many of the products are still in glass jars with metal tops. Are they going to exist in another couple of years? Or you go to your Home Depot and you buy your stain, and you buy your stain in a metal can. We know what those are going to be in a few years. And then partial substitution. This is an old game in durable goods, in automotive, appliance, and many other industries. And you know these guys, the car manufacturers fight for pennies. Once they start to realize that a number of these plastics are going to be far cheaper in the future, they're going to look to their Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4 suppliers to use more plastics in their products. And right now, the amount of plastics in a typical car is 20%. That's going to go up. And where are some of those products going to be made? They're going to be made here. Let me take a look at one other area. Hope that's, yep, it's kind of hard to see here. Oil versus natural gas. This is a little bit more complicated, so please bear with me and I'll try to explain. Some chemicals are produced as byproducts. An example, previously we were using crude oil in the form of naphtha to make ethylene. Now we're using ethane in the U.S. to make ethylene. One of the byproducts of using crude oil that came out of that process was a chemical called butadiene. Butadiene is useful and a key component in making rubber for tires. And we've seen butadiene prices simply because the chemical industry in the U.S. has switched almost exclusively to ethane as a feedstock because ethane's gotten cheaper via shale gas. And so they've had to deal with a 500% increase in their raw materials. And they didn't see that one coming. And that's changed the whole tire business on a global scale. And in some of the other areas, a variety of different chemical products are used. One of my favorites is carpeting or clothing, or you can take a couple of other examples. In here, there are a couple of different types of chemicals that could be used to make carpeting. You make carpeting out of nylon. You can make it out of polyester. You can make it out of polypropylene. Some of those use crude oil as their chemical precursor to get there. They will be at a significant disadvantage to those that are able to use the chemicals that come from shale gas. And if you're a carpet manufacturer, you know that your equipment, your entire production line, your process, your plant is built upon using one of these products. I build my production line and I'm making nylon carpet out of this plant. Reconfiguring is very expensive, very time consuming. I can't just switch over to polypropylene tomorrow if polypropylene prices drop. So as companies that have the foresight and can see some of these things, can understand some of these changes, will have a big jump over their competitors. And again, it's not a small change. It's not a % or 2 here. It's a huge change. So let me dive into a couple of conclusions. Shale gas is big. It's disruptive. It's going to translate from chemical industry into manufacturing. It's going to have an impact in the Ohio area. It's going to require companies to think differently and very radically about their business and where they get their suppliers and what products they use and what products they could substitute. But for them, there's a real prize. And of course, the whole shale gas revolution was driven by thinking differently. Here's another opportunity. And as the title of my slide states, is your organization ready? Is your organization mobilized for the changes that are going to come? And with that, I'd like to leave it and open up the floor to questions.
I have a question. To what extent are foreign producers seeing these economics and deciding to open plants here that would still be foreign producers, but would be produced on U.S. soil?
Yeah, we're seeing a number of foreign companies building new facilities that have never built facilities here in the they're building new facilities in the U.S. where they've never been present here in the U.S., and I think you're going to see a lot more. We're seeing a number of foreign companies already starting to shut down their ethylene production or their polyethylene or PVC production in their home countries, recognizing the cost disadvantage that they're at. That's only going to start going faster and faster.
Is there any disadvantage to the U.S. economy by having foreign companies come in as opposed to domestic companies taking up the opportunity?
I'm not an economist, so I really can't answer that. To me, investing in the U.S. and having a plant here means jobs for the U.S., means taxes for the U.S. So I'm a happy camper. If it's a U.S. company, that's great. If it's a foreign company, that's great. They recognize what's happening. Maybe even if it's a foreign company, they'll export more of the U.S. products and help us even more here in the U.S.
Questions from the floor? Raise your hand and I'll walk over to you with the microphone. Joe?
One of the things you talked about, Tom, is fertilizer. And you and I had a conversation months ago about fertilizer plants everywhere. Fertilizer plants are happening everywhere now. What's the impact of that on agriculture?
Right. Again, this is another example. So fertilizer comes from natural gas as it goes into ammonia, and from ammonia you produce fertilizer. U.S. is a net importer of fertilizer. We import right now about 50% of our fertilizer. Pretty shocking. Coming from places like Trinidad and Tobago where they have cheap natural gas, or coming from Saudi Arabia and other countries where natural gas prices have been far cheaper historically than the U.S. As these plants get built here in the U.S., and they're going up about one every month, maybe now one every 3 weeks. I mean, it's amazing. And they're massive plants. That will eventually translate into lower fertilizer prices for the farmer. Farmers, and you folks probably know this far better than I, living in this area of the country than Philadelphia, farmers set aside an amount of money for seed, herbicides, as well as fertilizers. Now they'll be able to buy a heck of a lot more fertilizer for their dollar. More fertilizer translates into greater crop yields. Greater crop yields translates into more money in their pocket. More money in their pocket, they decide to spend money, buy, expand. I need a new tractor, I need a new combine, which helps companies like, I guess, Caterpillar and Cummins we have here. It's a virtuous cycle. All these things, and that's just another example of how this whole cycle, once it starts going, has so many impacts to the U.S. economy that it's really hard for us to see now, but they're all good.
In the Appalachian Basin, there's a lot of paraffins in the product. Have you had any conversation on what could be done with that as a byproduct?
Well, again, the speaker prior to me talked about that a little bit. The desire, of course, is to take those off because they can be sold for more money. Right now, an example is ethane. We have a bottleneck in the pipelines getting the ethane to those areas where ethane is used in the chemical industry. Those pipelines will be built. Those products will be taken out and used by the chemical industry. A number of the higher products are ready, propanes and butanes. For a variety of reasons, you can't leave them in the natural gas and be able to sell it as natural gas. And we'll see some of those exported as well as being used by the chemical industry. So it's just going to be more and more of that.
Tom, can you talk a little bit about state economic development policy? What does Ohio need to do to attract these companies to Ohio? Who are our competitors in other states and what are they doing? Do you have a feel for that?
Yeah, again, this is historically the core of the plastics processing industry, so I am very optimistic that it will continue to be the core. The virtuous cycle is building up a relationship between the states and making it known that we want to have you here, businesses, and the universities and colleges that'll have the people that are technically trained understand that and have programs available, as well as the companies making the machines to make the polyethylene widget that goes into a car, as well as the chemical companies, and get these companies working together in a virtuous cycle in this area. Certainly, the plastics processors want to have available employees that know and understand their industry. Certainly, the equipment manufacturers want to sell more equipment to them, and they could make that equipment available to the universities so that the universities could train people and take in interns from the universities into their factories so they get to see the workers before they hire them. To me, the state has a key role in putting those pieces together and making it transparent and visible to companies to look to invest.
Another question from the floor? All right, then I'm going to run around back to the stage, and you can help me thank Tom Gellrich for his presentation.